Good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. John Paul Bingham, or JP, Pathways Director from the INBRE program. Welcome you all here to talk about and discover how you're going to move forward and producing now a poster, a research poster. But today we have a very special guest, a present ongoing student at UH Manoa, Selena. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience with the INBRE program, as well as the needs and dedication to get a poster from the research activities that she has undertaken. So Selena, welcome. So tell me a little bit about your research that you were doing during INBRE.
Sure. So for INBRE, I was doing my research on what is the relationship between low self-esteem and the gut microbiome composition, DNA methylation, and inflammation levels in Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And who are you doing that under with? Who's your supervisor?
Under Dr. Alika Manakea's lab.
Okay. So you were in his lab for how long?
I've been in his lab since the spring of 2022. Okay. So last year, 1 year.
And so you generated enough data to move forward to design a poster. Could you go through some of those aspects of data gathering and refinement and discussions, etc., that you had with your principal investigator?
Right. So we had to work on getting a lot of 16S data in because we were doing the gut microbiome, processing blood, monocyte, the enrichment of the monocytes, and then finding the DNA methylation, and then moving on with creating the poster and practicing for the presentation.
So tell me a little bit about how you created your poster.
Okay, so first I met with my mentor, Dr. Manakea, and asked him for his advice on what are the key results that we should put on the poster, because there's so much results, right? But he would know like which are the key results to put. So he would tell me what results he would suggest, and then I made a quick draft of my poster with all the basics, the intro, methods, the results, and the discussion. And then I would meet with him again, and then we would go over the poster, and he would give me revisions, like suggestions on how to revise, and just practice and practice and practice the presenting.
So I presume the actual formation of the poster took you a little time to do.
Right. It took me, several months to do it. Yeah.
Well, we have our symposia coming up soon, so hopefully everyone's listening and not panicking too much, but we've got to get things rolling. And this is a good part of what this talk is about today. And I'll be showing you some aspects of how I would go about preparing a poster. And I have prepared many posters and supervised many students in this particular venture. So hopefully the students will, have heard what you've had to say, Selena. Thank you very much, because to get it from someone who's actually participated as a student is very, very important. Now, was it nerve-wracking in regards to going to the symposia and standing in front of your poster?
Yeah, definitely. It was so nerve-wracking, but thanks to my mentors and my lab manager for letting me practice in front of them so many times and like role playing different people, that really helped me be a little bit more calm during the presentation.
So practice makes perfect, I think, is a saying, hey?
Right, like lots of practice. And the key advice that I got from my mentors was to really emphasize the significance of the research, like focus on the bigger picture first, and then kind of go down to your specifics of the paper. It's kind of like that sand hourglass figure. So you go and describe the bigger picture first, then you go into the specifics of your results. And then after that, you come back with the bigger picture at the end to wrap it up. How does our research add on to the existing literature that's out there already?
What a great analogy, the hourglass analogy. So, well, thank you very much for coming along and sharing your experience with our students. And hopefully, I wish you the best. Selena is actually taking a gap year and going to be applying to medical schools and hopefully we'll see you practicing medicine in 5, 6 years time, maybe. Hey,
Yeah, fingers crossed.
fingers crossed for
Alrighty.
you. Okay, bye
Thank
for
you
now.
so much. All right, bye-bye.
Bye bye. And Dr. Mason just dropped in. Hello, Dr. Mason. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Bingham, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Now, if you were an undergraduate student preparing for the medical school symposium, what piece of advice would you give these students?
Oh, goodness. I think Selena had great advice in her hourglass analogy in that most people that come up to your poster aren't going to be experts in your field. So starting at a really overhead viewpoint and then really diving in as you get to them, as you get them interested in your research, but definitely starting with an overview, a broad overview of what you're doing and what your goal is, what your hypotheses were, and what your findings were.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Mason, and I will talk to you a little later on. But I'm now going to do a presentation in regards to what I think how you, as a student, could potentially move forward in preparing a award-winning poster. And ideally, let's see if I can get it all up here. Yes. And we'll be taking it from there. So give me a second just to pin myself. There we go. So again, I'm John Paul Bingham, or JP Bingham. I'm the director of Pathway. And I'm going to tell you some of the experiences that I've had with students over the years, particularly undergraduate students, on how to create and present a winning poster in the sense of getting that information across, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, so to speak. So one thing we have to first emphasize, and this is something that is not trivial, is the issue. Let me put the highlighter laser pointer on. There we go. Is that you first have to register for the conference. So I've put the link in here for you to be able to register, and the registration date's coming to an end because the admission for abstracts is actually today for the those who have not completed. You're going to have to shake a tail a little bit. So the first thing it's going to ask you to do is to do various checks in regards to your name, your location, what type of participation you're having. And if you are a primary presenter, you're going to have to submit an abstract. But the first thing is you've got to make sure you've got to construct your abstract, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but we've already talked quite a bit about that from our previous discussion. So you can have your mentor review the abstract, they will sign off, and then basically you need a check to make sure you're with the admissions requirements such as space and word limits, and that you've actually cited your funding bodies that have supported your research, including the INBRE program. One of the primary things with posters, and Celine and both Dr. Mason has indicated that you keep it simple because people who are coming to your poster may not be experts in your field. You're there to educate them and to get them to understand and appreciate what you've done. So people use the term KISS, keep it simple and stupid. I don't think it should be stupid, but I think ultimately the questions that you need to ask is, what are you adding to the current knowledge base of your area of research? And we're going to actually examine why scientific research posters are so important. Because as scientists, one of the important things is to communicate good science. And we've got to keep all these aspects in mind in regards to not doing bad science, making sure we have blind tests or controls, that we are not over interpreting or using misleading results to find a conclusion that fits our potential hypothesis. So in a poster, we've got to make sure this type of information also comes through in regards to doing good science, reporting it appropriately, being able to communicate it, and have our findings be both accurate and precise. They may not be what we want to see in reflection to our hypothesis, but it might mean we might need to change our hypothesis a little bit to accommodate the observations that we have seen. And we might need to revamp our hypothesis, because we do hypothesis-driven research. That's what science does. We come up with an idea, we have a capacity to test that idea, we then see if that test meets our expectations or our understandings, or goes against what we have originally thought. And there might be other reasons and circumstances why that occurs. So we've got to do good science. So when we look at a typical poster format, we see the title, the abstract, which are very important to provide a very brief summary of what the work is entailing. The title, as you'll see, needs to be catching enough to really give attraction to the audience in regards to the topic that it's focusing on. And then we're going to actually discuss the main next bodies in 3, 4, 5, and 6, the poster format, the poster content, the visual presentation, but also the conference presentation itself. And this is very important in your process of building your professional network up. So we're going to look at the poster format in the form of the introduction, the methods, the results, the discussions and findings, and also future works. But we're also going to closely look at how we should be looking at our diagrams, tables, and graphs in regards to presenting these in an appropriate manner. Now, as you can see by my little comic here, this poster is pretty jam-packed. And you've got to be a bit careful about overwhelming your audience. Sure, a person who is doing exactly the same type of research in the same field that you are may get a lot out of this, but the majority of these people in your audience are not going to be experts in your field and may become overwhelmed with the content and the type of information you're trying to portray and provide. So we've got to get to that hourglass, as Celine said, that shape in regards from the broader picture to the narrow aspect, then bringing it back to the larger impact in regards to why your research is important to be communicated in a poster. So we've already talked about the abstract in regards to it being a brief summary in a logical format, not too detailed, but makes the reader want to seek out your poster. So it's basically the book duster, or the prelude to what the real content of the book is. Now note, today is the actual due date for your abstracts. So don't be late, note the word limit. Do not rush it, and hopefully you're in the process of having your supervisor, your mentor, approving it and reviewing it to then actually submit to the system. But also make sure you are acknowledging the INBRE grant system that has supported your research, because we provide you both the stipend, the award, and we provide you also funding for your materials. So again, this is the abstract, the big questions that you want to ask yourself. What's the impact of your research? Why should people care about your research? What do you want to tell them about your research? And what are your main findings and conclusions? So when you have read an abstract, you want to have the audience go away with a single message. And that message is maybe A plus B equals C, or Y and X come together to make K, whatever. But the issue gets down to you want to take home a message, because that message might get them very intrigued in what you're actually doing to learn more, and they will hunt out your particular poster. So this is from the abstract. So let's, again, an example of an abstract here in regards to content and materials. Some will allow pictures, some will allow references. But the main thing I want to talk about here is the title. The title has to be the same title you're utilizing on your poster. So once that abstract title is submitted, that is the same poster title, the same title you use on your poster. So you also need to provide the authors. So here we have a number of authors here in a particular order, and the order is very important. The first author is usually the author that is presenting the poster, and they're going to be usually having an underline or an asterisk on their name on the poster to indicate that's the person I might be speaking to. They'll have a name tag also, maybe on their lapel, on their suit or their shirt. We also want to provide the institute's location or affiliations of the individuals. There might be one or two institutes or localities that have to be cited. I'd also recommend you place your email address there. The reason being, if somebody is very interested about your work and has some additional follow-up questions, or comes to your poster and you're not there, and wants to talk to you about this, this is more in much larger conferences, not maybe our small conference setting, they can contact you by email at their particular leisure. So again, the abstract states the problem, states the impact and the importance of the problem and why should the reader care, but also providing you how you're going to address and solve the problem. You briefly explain the methods, briefly interpret your results and outcomes, and then present usually one key finding that could be evidential from your data that you can present in your poster. And then you might want to reflect on your observations and how it impacts your problem. But again, this is the abstract, but some of this is going to mimic what you're also going to see in the poster. So the first thing I'd suggest you do is think about a poster template, and these are available online, and you can find these at various websites. You might have to sign up for something, or you might find some one there where you can actually basically have it already broken down in 3 columns, telling you where the heading goes, who are the affiliate headings and author headings, and then basically the content in regards to the introduction, the hypothesis, the methods, the results, the discussions, and the future work. So again, these are available and you can actually find those on the internet. I find using 3 columns is actually very good. With the central column is where you're putting a lot of your results and information and diagrams. So we'll talk more a little bit about that as we go on. So the poster format ideally should be like the introduction. This is not a cut and paste of the abstract. It should ideally be about 3 paragraphs and provides an important background to your problem and why and how you are going to address this particular problem. The problem might be in the form of a statement or even a hypothesis in regards to what the problem is. So you need to make sure you state this in saying, this is the problem I'm going to examine, blah, 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 blah. Or my hypothesis is bang, 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 and this is how I'm going to examine this. So you might need to specifically address how you're going to direct your research to the problem. And in the introduction, you might also indicate the expected outcomes, particularly if you don't have any physical real data, that you're just starting your research project out. But ultimately, you're going to have a good idea of what you might expect to find. But again, your results are going to prove that or deny that in regards to when you look at your discussion and your future work. The methods, which usually is a very larger part, much larger than usually the introduction, is an issue where you should keep it brief because you might be using multiple methods. And don't make it too technical. Again, people come from different backgrounds and may not understand the approaches or methodologies that you're using. So they might need to be spelled out a little bit, but not in too much detail. We are hoping that your audience are going to have a basic scientific knowledge, but your concept and your capacity is to really demonstrate a logical, progressive movement and steps behind the work to get the data. Because one thing that we have to examine is the validity of the experimental design. And I suggest maybe you might want to talk about putting a flow diagram. Start with sample extract here, process it this way, do this, do this, do this, see what results you get, what kind of things you might be able to ascertain from those informational flow diagrams. But that's just a diagram. It's not actually illustration of results, but it's actually a workflow process that gives you an indication that you've actually thought about the experimental design and how you're going to actually achieve your results. Now, the results section, we'll come back to this a little bit more when we look at specific presentations of results. So we've got to discuss, is the science good? Is there good data analysis? Are statistics involved? And it's very highly likely that there will be statistics involved. You've got to make sure you do the appropriate t-tests or de novo tests in regards to looking at the confidence interval. And some of this is going to come through on the figures and the tables as well as the graphs. And when we look at our figures, tables, and graphs, ideally they should be standalone illustrations, and they're going to have to be very high quality. And you want to be very clear to what the reader should be extrapolating from those figures, diagrams, tables, and graphs. We've got to make sure that we are taking them by the hand and really pulling them through to get to the same conclusions that we came to, so that it's going to be easier for them to digest the discussion and the future work. Now, the logical process is very, very important, and to make sure that all the diagrams and tables do flow, that it's not jumping around too much. You might want to put a table here, then a diagram there, and another diagram there, and another table, where mixing that combination up might not actually give you the right flow. And I state here, 1,000 words are often worth one good picture. So you might find a little diagram in regards to how you did your PCR reaction, or how you did your assay or your statistical analysis in a flow diagram. It again provides you the confidence of your approach in your experiment and validation to the approach that you used in your research. The discussions, findings, and conclusions. This should be a max about 2 to 3 paragraphs, and it basically draws the reader to follow your thought line processes to allow them to draw to the same conclusions that you have also undertaken. Here you can actually highlight critical findings where you might actually have to specify, looking at table number 1, you can see the data indicates A, B, and C, or looking at figure 1, which illustrates the purity of the compound. You know, these are kind of things that you can refer to in your discussions and findings and conclusions. So again, when we come to this discussional aspect, you might want to also state the problem again and how you have addressed that problem by your research venture, and how your data has helped solve or partly solve a part of this particular problem. And you need to state these pretty clearly in regards to my findings have demonstrated that with the problem A, B, and C, I can find a solution using D. You know, again, a kind of a statement that draws the reader to fully understand what you've presented in regards to coming to the same conclusion of the analysis of the data. Now, the future works gives you the capacity just to kind of have a little freedom here, where you can hypothesize and think and theorize in regards to what have my conclusions given me? And how can I now expand upon those conclusions? Do they really address and conclude my problem and solve my problem? Or is there other works that I need to do now to actually help further the solution to my problem? So again, you might want to stress that additional work or types of additional work that might need to be undertaken to solve or move forward to solving your particular problem. So that future works becomes very, very important. It might be an issue if you have no data in regards to you're just starting your project. You might describe the future works that you are actually going to be undertaking after your experimental design, and looking at how things might umbrella in regards to becoming a much larger research project, because that's usually how research projects start. They usually start with a very simple idea, and the data starts illustrating a much larger issue or problem, and it might then change out to become 5 individual projects from one stemming individual analysis. So again, the future works is very, very important. So let's now look importantly at the poster content. And as I state here, everything should be at a very high standard. We call that a publication standard or quality. So when you look at your individual diagrams or even your subheadings of introduction, hypothesis or impact, or the issue of methods or sub-methods, results, findings, conclusions, and discussion, future work, you should have these in bold, and they should be descriptive. You might actually have subheadings, which might also help guide the reader to the next stage of your particular research. So it's like taking your grandma by the hand and telling her what you're actually doing step by step by step, and try not to miss out any of the individual steps. Here we use legends in our figures and our graphs, where our figures and graphs should be standalone, and that a person could come up and just see that figure and be able to understand clearly what that figure is doing and what is it actually meaning. So again, it's the only necessary information that is concluded or provided in that particular legend. And this provides an issue to also provide the reader specific directions or indicators to draw their attention to specific items within the diagram or in the graph or table. You might be using arrows, circles, or bolding or highlighting to give you that particular aspect. The figure and graph should usually have, and the table should usually have a legend title. So I'll show you what I mean by that in a second, and that's usually bolded. Also, graphs clearly might have some statistical analysis in there. Trend lines or bolding and coloring helps the individual to be able to have their attention to be drawn to those particular features that have significant value in your particular research discussion. And also with graphs, make sure the tables and the graphs are appropriately labeled. The X and Y values are given and that increments are indicated. And if the graph is off the Richter scale in regards to the X-axis, and there has to be a break, indicate that there was a break to make sure the scaling is correct. Again, these are just very simple approaches which your principal investigator and your mentor will be able to direct you to some of these finer aspects in regards to the poster content of the figures, legends, the figures themselves, the tables, the table titles, the graphs, and the statistical analysis requirements. Here's an example what I mean in regards to a figure. So we have a title in the figure. This is a chromographic profile of a compound from a turmeric plant, actually. And so we have a figure title. We have a clear indication of the chromatogram, the time, the X and the Y axis in regards to the absorption units and the time. And then we actually have a figure number. This is really important. So again, we can move through figures and tables and graphs. You might call it figure 1 because you might actually refer to figure 1 in your discussion. Or you might see that in your results section. You know, looking at figure 3, I can indicate that there's a number of isomers of my particular turmeric material present in the BKK analog or variant of this turmeric species. But also, if we have a look at the legend itself, it's a standalone statement in regards to this is the high pressure liquid chromatography profile with extracted at 550 nanometers showing associated peaks with these different compounds. But it also states the peak shoulders, these things here, are effect of ketoenol tautomers. So in this case, we give a little bit of information to why the observations we see. So again, this is very, very important to make it very clear and distinct. Your actual legend here might actually be 5 or 6 lines in regards to describing or providing the information in the particular diagram that it's associated with. When we look at a table, it can be a little bit more confusing, but we've got to be very careful in regards to ensuring that all the information is present. And in this case, not all the information is present. So typically we have a title. So this one has a table 2 indicator, a title, which is a descriptive component in regards to what's actually this table is showing and what was done to obtain these types of results. And we have, in this case, a trial number, a date, the type of hormones, the N number, because remember, science needs to be having a level of replication. So usually N equals 3 is the minimal suggested replicable analysis. We have then spawning rates, egg sizes, sperm numbers, and then fertility rates. But we also have these things in regards to subheadings or sub-legends. And these are usually done in a smaller text, which will actually refer to the issue of abbreviation. So this one here, so we see body weight is actually indicated here. But as you can see, there's an error in this particular table. We have superscripts 1, 2, 3 here, but we do not see any part of the subscript legend giving us any information about 1, 2, and 3. So there's a little error on this particular table. So we've got to make sure the tables stand alone, that somebody comes up and will be able to read and get an idea of what's occurring on this particular experiment and these types of results and data that is actually placed on the poster in the results section. Other things that you can potentially consider utilizing in your poster are QR codes. You've got to be very careful though. We have seen posters very similar to what I've illustrated here, with a main finding and a QR code with a lot more detailed components. That's a little bit of way of cheating, because you're not really giving a lot of information to the person who is looking at the poster. They're going to be more relied on this QR code. My preference is actually to use the QR codes, particularly if you have videos, additional data, or research papers that you want to provide the reader. So in this case, the QR codes, I would not use them to direct them to a brand spanking new poster online, but to use them to address, to archive information and data that is responsible and reflective of the main content of the paper. So again, going back to what we've seen previously with the 3 columns, with the introduction, the hypothesis, the methods, the results, the discussion and the conclusions, and the future work, is mostly more appropriate with a QR code illustrating maybe a video, how you're doing the experiment, or your observations of your experiment, or research papers that, though you reference or cite, might be worthwhile for the person to look at your post who's very interested in your work to actually see the total reference or the total paper in its entirety. So this is a way to give those people looking at your post as your audience a capacity to achieve those particular goals. So visual presentation is really, really important in a poster. You've got to think about the issue of white space. So if you have a look at my slide here, I have a large piece of white space here, and that's not actually very good. Maybe I should have put another figure in there or something to draw your attention to the content of this particular slide. If you have too much white space, it can actually be a problem and a distraction, but too complex can be disbalancing and cause basic misinterpretation or confusion in the process that you need to be examining the poster. So some of the comments I will make here in regard to some of the things that I have employed in posters is use high quality images, and you need to test them. Print them out black and white and see if they look good in black and white. Print them out in color and see if they look good in color. Then you need to question yourself, are all these images necessary? So again, you want to keep it simple with that same term, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, in regards to, are they necessary, or are they just cluttering and filling up? What does that picture actually tell us? So when you read a journal, which you've all read scientific journals by now, you're going to realize they only selectively put in certain key illustrations of data because they must have reams and reams and reams of this data, but they're only selecting very high quality materials that express and confirm their observations in their research paper. You might need to adjust the colors and the contrast to keep the general color of the poster, where we saw the INBRE example I gave with the green poster. You don't want to have any bright reds or something like that that will contrast on that green, but you don't also be monotone or monochrome color in your particular poster. You want sometimes a little bit of color to stand out. Crop and edit images so all the information is clear and plain and presentable, and that the critical information is potentially highlighted or underlined or bolded or colorized. Give photos short titles or captions, and we saw that previously with the figures. And you're trying to help the reader to understand what they are and what they are actually involved with your research. If you're just doing a petri dish and you're looking at some growth, you might want to say, this is a petri dish of XY grown on ABC. This is at 24 hours. And you might want to have a measuring bar beside it to say, okay, the growth represents 5 centimeters as per measuring bar. So again, you're giving captions to allow people to fully understand what that visual image is. You might want to directly label things such as maps, charts, and graphs, but again, you've got to make them clear. So if you're doing, let's say, a survey of the shoreline of Oahu, you might want to have a map of Oahu with the north directional compass point, and then the sites that you've actually surveyed with their particular names. But you've got to also make it clear and not too cluttered or complex. You need to simplify charts and graphs and make them reader friendly. That's the main thing. Again, make them reader friendly, use bold lines, so you can clearly understand what the points you're getting at. And a lot of these visual components in your poster, don't make them the size of a postage stamp. And this does happen. You need to make sure you can read the poster 5 feet away. So again, my eyes aren't so good. They're old and weary. I might need to come very close up to go see something. But the 5-foot rule with diagrams, posters, and text is the ideal rule for most people. So again, it's very important to make sure you have the right font of size. It's not too cramped. It's very aesthetically looking. It's well balanced, and you're going to get people coming to your poster because it looks, attractive. So again, the 5-foot rule is very important. The imaging and placement of those particular images are very, very important. So again, using those 3 column processes helps you to guide the viewer through the individual poster, down one column, up to the top, down the next column, up to the top. This might be facilitated with numbers in regards to introduction, number 1, introduction, 2, aims, 3, methods, 4, results, 5, discussion, conclusions, 6, future work, 7, references. So again, there's a logical process that you can undertake in making that walk through a complex amount of information in the form of a poster to allow you to ultimately get the point across. So the layout becomes very important. And here we have, these are reasonable examples of that. I do like this one here in regards to the figures, the graphs, the simplest. You can't see it because it's a bit blurred, but it was basically a pretty good representation in regards to how a poster should be aesthetically laid out. So use columns is a very good approach, and keep things aligned. So with this one, you see very stringent alignments in regards to the text and to the illustrated pictures and graphs. But this one actually has a little too much text to it. You don't want to overwhelm your audience with text. You want to keep it simple and get to the point. But there's a load of different templates out on the internet, and I've actually put a few references at the end of this talk, which will allow you to explore some of those particular templates. Now, the actual presentation at the conference is also very important, and it needs to be practiced. And this is what Celine was talking about, practicing a minute madness pitch. So for 1 minute, you should be able to talk about your research and the illustrated work that you did on your poster and the conclusions that you drew from that research and the impact of that research onto your original problem, the hourglass component that we talked about before. You should be ready to draw your attention to your poster. You want to introduce yourself. You will have a name card on a lanyard. You're going to engage your audience, and you have to be enthusiastic about your research, what you're doing, and importantly, stressing how it's going to change the world. What is that big impact? Why should people be concerned or attracted to your research? What is the meaning to them in your research endeavors? The best way to practice this is actually to do it in front of a mirror or in front of your professors or your peers in regards to being comfortable to talking to individuals about the work that is illustrated in your poster. Now, a good pitch is very rememberable, and it can actually come back to you in years to come. I remember speaking to you about your research 2-3 years ago about X, Y, and Z. That was very interesting. Did you go any further with that? So, again, these things can be very, very lasting to the audience. But a good pitch, you want to make sure that they take home a message. Usually it's going to be how you address that critical world problem or that research problem that you are analyzing, because that means they have understood what you have undertaken, they've understood why you've undertaken it, and they've understood what your observations are. So you might want to make a very bold statement. My work has shown, given this problem, I can address this problem this way. But don't try to overload them with too much fine details, because it will switch them off. You want to engage them, and the engagement is only going to be around 3 to 5 minutes, and that's it. And you're going to get multiple people coming to your particular poster. But remember, they too can read. So my suggestion, and it's a very strong suggestion, do not read off your poster. You might say, oh, the introduction, here's my problem. Why should you care about my problem? My problem is this, this, and this. And this is how I'm going to research this. The methods I'm going to use is A, B, C, and D. And my results, now you start pointing to the results on your post and saying, we did this experiment, and this is what this particular table shows, or this particular figure indicates. So again, you are not just reading off what you have written on your poster. Your audience can read. So again, this is something very, very important to come to terms with, that it's very dissatisfying to stand in front of a poster and have someone read off the bits and pieces, particularly if you're in a group poster. So it means group workers need to be able to take each section. I'm going to do the introduction. I'm going to talk about the methods and results, and I'll talk about the discussion and conclusions and the future work. So you might need to divvy up the work if you're working in a group. Now, I put this in blue because this is a part of your network building. If you were actually going to a conference, more official conference, like on the mainland, an international or national conference, where you are going to be meeting people who you might have read their research publications, or might even read their textbooks on their particular area, which you are now researching. Your issue of engaging them is to make a network, to make contact, because they may be your future boss or your future collaborator. So one thing is to have a business card. Now, we're not asking you to have business cards for this one, but in the future, when you're going to these national and international conferences, you want to have some business cards which illustrate who you are and where you're coming from. Some people actually make little poster cards of their poster and give them out. The idea is to give that information out, but the real key point is to get the business card of the other person who is interested in your research. Because you might phone them up and say, hey, Dr. X, I met you at the conference A, B, and C, and you were very interested in my research. And I've just actually read a recent paper of yours, which describes some of the similar aspects of the research that we're doing. I'm now doing this work, is this something of potential interest for a collaboration? Or you might be looking for a graduate position or a postdoc or a PhD. And that might also be a way to actually get your foot in the door, because now you have their contact details. But that's something to keep in the back of your mind in the future conferences that you are going to attend. As scientists, we attend many conferences during our career, usually two to three a year. And in this case, this is your first conference in many ways to get you to start preparing, to start rehearsing, to understand the engagement mechanisms and procedures that we take on as professionals in a conference. So again, down to being professional, your attire, your engagement and respect needs to be paramount. You do not know who you may be talking to. They may be the lead in your field and you don't recognize their face, but you might recognize their name. I've actually been at a conference where a colleague of mine was talking to a world-renowned leader. And I said, did you know who you were speaking to? And they said, no. And I said, next time you go look at their lanyard, their name, and you'll get their information. And the next time someone else came around, I watched my friend look down at the guy's lanyard, and he was a world-known Nobel Prize winner. And you could see his jaw drop. He got very, very nervous because now he was talking to a Nobel Prize winner. So again, you know, these are things that might come out of the blue, but just tactics and strategies to try and get you familiar with how you need to conduct yourself as a professional when you go to these conferences. And as I said, you need to engage your topic. You need to demonstrate your knowledge. And that may not be on the poster in regards to what you've presented in your one-dimensional piece of paper. It might be, you know, oh, we had this problem, you know, but we overcame that problem because we did this experiment. The person who you might be talking to might already have some insight into the experiment that you've done because they may have been doing this sometime and might even give you some suggestions. Now, have you tried this? This actually worked in our lab where we were doing the same experiment and it actually suited us very well. You might want to consider this because this might alleviate some of your concerns or problems. Also, be enthusiastic regarding the topic, but don't be over enthusiastic. You know, it's good to be positive and knowledgeable, but again, you know, you need to be at a professional standing and be respectful to the other person. Always listen to their questions very carefully from your audience. And the best way I find about taking a question from an audience is actually to repeat the question back. Now, that gives you two things. It gives you the capacity to think about the answer, a little more time to think about the answer, but also important to make sure that you are answering the right question. You might even want to rephrase their question a little bit so you can give and deliver an answer. Because in some cases, their interpretation might be a little different. You know, like, no, I saw you do A, B, and C, but it gives you K. And so you go, well, you know, to understand your question, we have to actually define what K is. Then we'll understand what A, B, and C are. So let me tell you about K, and then we'll talk about A, B, and C. So you've rephrased the question a little bit to re-emphasize the points that you may be finding on your research poster or your knowledge base, but also you're bringing clarity to the discussion, but again, in a respectful, professional manner. Listen to the advice they give you very carefully in regards to the types of suggestions and the types of insight they may have on your work, because this actually may shape or reshape the future of your own research. Because again, as I said, you may be speaking to an expert in the field who has a relative amount of experience in your area in regards to your research. So again, respectful and listen carefully. And you might want to take a little notepad with you and jot down these components, because you are not going to remember after, you know, the 20th person comes up to speak to you about your poster. So again, other things you can actually do towards the end when the audience has dissipated or there's a person still hanging around, you might want to engage in them and say, well, how did I do in presenting my research? What kind of suggestions can you provide in strengthening my research? What about suggestions in providing how I can strengthen my poster presentation or my data or my figures? And you'll find the professors will be quite happy to provide some insight in regards to making some strict structural component discussions and criticisms, which is structural, to actually help you do a better job next time, because we are always in the process of learning. The biggest problems I see at the conferences and their posters, it's too little, too late, and it's a rush job, and it shows. You need to be organized and structured, and you need to be able to put the information in to what you need to present your data. typing mistakes, poor construction, disjointed presentations, etc., is usually more characteristical when we see a group project where there's multiple presenters and multiple people working on different aspects of the overall poster research problem. So here, if you have a multiple partner project research work, you might want to have a central presenter who knows the whole story, but then divvies off the various parts to the other members. So again, you're going to have to be very well organized and structured and have to know each other's component, so you can actually pick up if the other person's away or tell the whole story by yourself. Again, also the issue of poster design, not cramping it too much, because again, layout is very, very important. And that issue of having too much information can be detrimental to attracting an audience and having them comprehend to what you're doing. The other thing is making sure your message is very clear, that the purpose and reason for doing your research work is very clearly stated and is the driving momentum behind your future work that you will be doing on this particular area. The big thing is to make sure your audience take home that take-home point. You know, if there's one thing, and if you can think about one line or one sentence that if someone had read your poster, they'd come away with or A equals B. Okay, that's the statement I wanted to make. My whole experiments were designed to testing what A was, what testing B was, and whether A and B were equal to each other. So if they understand that, they take home that message that from your problem, from your research, A and B equal each other. The poster themselves, when you start seeing very large posters in very large conferences, that they become somewhat generic. They become a little boring. So you want to try and make it stand out in regards to the illustration quality, maybe the QR code, video, linking the photo information to your phone, which they can scan a QR code with, all the references in that particular regard. So trying to stand out and make an impression, because impression is everything. That first 30 seconds of you starting to talk and your engagement with your audience is one of the most critical components in your period of 5 minutes, because you're either going to lose them after the 1.5 minutes, they're going to start drifting off or ask a question because they don't understand something. Ideally, you're trying to guide them through your research step by step and have them fully understand what you are undertaking. Good data. So a bad poster, let's have a look at a bad poster. This one is crammed. What they did, they actually inserted the abstract. The text is mundane, monotonous, and boring in regards to being very large, in regards to intimidating the amount, the methods, the figures, though they do have legends. And I suppose this is the legend here, a very large legend for this piece of data, very crammed. It's very, very kind of sad, though it's mostly actually a very great, excellent piece of research. But there are ways to make excellent research look very crummy, given the issue of information passage that you're trying to portray. Keep to the general points, abbreviate as much as you possibly can in regards to shrinking it down, not using abbreviations, but shrinking the content down. Because as I say here, every time an INBRE student submits a bad poster, a panda goes hungry. And we do not want hungry pandas, do we? So again, work hard. Talk to your principal investigator, talk to your lab mates, but also note there are the posters and abstracts from the previous symposia available for you to view, to see how others have actually taken. And I'll give you those links in the presentation for this slide presentation. And I will put that on the INBRE library drive, the Google Drive that we have, so you'll have a link to that. So again, keep it simple, space it out, make it aesthetically looking and pleasing, keep the data right, Keep it to the hypothesis, make sure it addresses the problem, and ensure that it's not so jam-packed and crammed and it makes you go cross-eyed. So here's some of the key points that I would take home. Less is better. Poster layout and the design needs very considerable consideration. And this includes both the coloring, the headings, the boldness, the graphics, and the subheadings, etc. Everything you can think about laying it out in front of you in regards to its design. Provide excellent descriptive, that should be descriptive, titles. So for your subtitles and for your main title of your poster. With the abstract, it should be concise in regards to the point and components of your research. And again, that abstract is not integrated into your poster, cut and paste. Some of the content can be brought into the introduction, but not word for word. That's a bad behavior. This introduction needs to be strong to argue the importance and the current status of the problem that you're examining. And that's something I do see a lot of students missing out. Why should I care about your research? What is the problem you're addressing? The methods need to be brief and descriptive and concise, but not the focus of the poster. That should be a poster, not paper. The figures and the figure legends need to be good and fully descriptive and also in a logical manner. In your tables, figures, and graphs, you might have subtitles, indicators, and legends or descriptors that are going to allow them to be an individual element. So if that was taken out, you could read it, and someone with some knowledge will be able to understand what it actually means quite easily. And they need to be of, again, publication standard and quality. You might want to have a logical process for referring to your figures, your tables, and your legends. So figure 1, table 1, etc. So you can actually cite these and refer back to these in your results and your discussions to actually maximize the understanding of the reader when they go back to see that particular table and extrapolate the information and then make the same conclusion that you have done in your discussion. Please, please, please check spelling and grammar. Use a grammar checker or use a peer or your professor will hopefully be able to find those typos and mistakes. Have your references listed. So your references that you are citing, you might have a citational system for your references that you are indicating in your introduction, or you might have some references in your discussion. So, but you have to have a reference list and some type of system that indicates their citational capacity to see where that reference goes. The easiest one is to just use a sub number 1, 2, 3, references 1, 2, 3. Some people use the last name of the first author, ETL, and the year that it's published. So it depends on the type of referencing system you're going to use. Finally, in your poster, you should make sure that, again, you acknowledge your funding source or an agency or people who have helped and provided assistance to complete this work. It's very important because these are called acknowledgements. And you want to acknowledge the people who have given you a helping hand or an idea, because science is built upon the standing of other people. It's not just come out of thin space. It builds gradually upon a concept, a philosophy, and a foundation. I strongly suggest you apply the 5-foot rule to ensure that basically you can see and read the poster and that everything is in the same font style and text style. That's very important. I hate seeing people switching from Times to Arial to other symbol forms. And you might want to ensure, to get perfection, is to do a pre-poster presentation to your research laboratory peers and your laboratory mentor before the conference and seek comments and suggestions. And you might want to do this before you even submit the poster for printing, because you only get one go printing the poster. You might find there's a typo and you want to get it changed. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to keep printing off everyone's poster 5 or 6 times. So it's very, very critical that you go through the process of the checks and balances to ensure that your poster is at top notch. So receiving comments and critical feedback is very, very important, because it might actually change how you lay out your poster, how you actually describe your content, or bring your attention to some of the results in your discussion. This part is really critical. Number 15 is really, really critical, which really kind of distinguishes a bad poster from a good poster. That comment, that critical feedback is essential for you. You are at the beginning stages of your career, of your capacity to communicate in a professional network style as a scientist. So having this feedback is very beneficial to allow you to move forward. The big thing, what I see in good posters, that they tell a story from the beginning to the end. They provide the evidence and the facts to the stories. They justify their outcomes and interpretations. And importantly, they re-examine the question that they originally proposed in the introduction, and that they will say, moving forward, these are some of the things that we might need to now examine, given our original problem and what we now have concluded. We now move forward with a new problem or an extension of the original problem. So these 15 points I find very helpful in regards to getting students in a better position for presenting a poster. So I've put some resources down here in regards to the QR code generators, some articles in regards to how to build a better poster, some guidelines in regards to, I think this one has some templates for posters, but in this poster presentation, you can take the poster presentation for the INBRE poster that I've quickly put together, this one here, and you could potentially use that if you so desire. It's always nice to maybe put the INBRE logo up there, and then your title, your subheading regarding your authors and your affiliations, your introduction, maybe your hypothesis, maybe your methods here, or your results all in here. Then your interpretation of your results, your discussion, maybe your future work, and finally your references, as well as acknowledgement of your funding sources and the people that have helped you undertake this particular research venture. So hopefully that's helped you a little bit. And we will be having on Friday an open forum in regards to Q&As regarding how you think about building your poster. So take away what you have seen here today and me talk about designing and constructing a poster. And then we'll ultimately have another discussion in a few days' time once you've thought about it and mulled about it a little bit in regards to thinking how you're going to now move forward. We're only about a month away from the symposia. There's going to be an announcement regarding where you're going to get your posters printed, and you have to submit your documentation to get them printed and then pick them up. I believe usually pick them up at the symposia, but there'll be some individuals who will get them printed at their individual institutes or elsewhere. So I'm going to now stop the sharing and the recording.